Hello and welcome to Informally Formal. Our today's guest, Barrister Sattar, is an advocate of the Bangladesh Supreme Court and head of the legal firm Sattar and Company. So without further ado, let's talk to Barrister Sattar. Welcome back, Barrister Sattar. It's so good to have you back with our program.
Thank you, Akbar bhai. Same here. The feeling's mutual.
All right. So our today's topic is force majeure, a term that common people may not be aware of. So I will let you explain what that is and the importance of it in contract resolution. So over to you.
Thank you, Akbar bhai. Force majeure, basically a clause which, if established, will relieve the parties for performing their contracts. So now, a valid claim under a force majeure clause due to, for example, COVID-19 would relieve the party who is on any obligation under the contract from being liable for that default. Now, what is a force majeure clause? It's usually a clause in a contract which expressly states that if this agreement cannot be performed for any reason which is beyond the control of the parties, then the non-performing party will be excused from that particular default. Now, there are several examples, for example, acts of God, like a natural calamity, even this pandemic. There are several examples, etc., basically. So these examples of force majeures, basically in simple terms, if I capture it in a nutshell for the viewers, it's a successful invocation of a force majeure clause generally relieves the parties from their respective contractual obligation or liability.
Right. So if I understand you correctly, Samir, what you're saying is something that is truly beyond your control, beyond the party's control. Now, it can be an act of God, like a natural disaster, a hurricane, floods, storm, what have you, or it can be man-made, like wars, riots, lockouts, but it is definitely beyond your control. So let's go back to what happened in 2020 with the pandemic as it took hold all over the world, as it did in Bangladesh as well. As you know, in Bangladesh, more than 80% of our foreign earnings comes from the ready-made garments, and buyers all across the world were very quick to enforce force majeure and get out of the contracts. Reflect on that for us a little bit.
Yes, actually, the start of the pandemic and more so in the year 2020, we have seen a lot of these cross-border contracts being cancelled by the buyers, and they try to rely on the force majeure clause. Although, personally, if you ask me, I do not think that they should have been allowed or they should be allowed to raise such clauses, because obviously the performance of the contract from the liability for non-performance, there has to be a causal link to the force majeure event. Okay, so for example, if I contract with you to supply X number of goods, and I should not be allowed to rely upon the force majeure clause to say that I do not want the goods, okay, because it does not affect my performance. On the other hand, the Bangladeshi supplier can say that, no, this is a force majeure event, or everything is in lockdown, we cannot perform the contract, for example. They can rely upon it. But for the foreign buyers, when they relied on force majeure clause, to me, it was like trying to escape from their contractual obligation just because financial world or the world has gone into a financial dip. Now, it's a different thing that they may not be able to sell it onwards after buying it from the Bangladeshi exporters because of the lockdown or the pandemic, because the sales have gone down. But that is a separate issue altogether. That does not concern the contractual parties. And to me, that is not an acceptable plea of force majeure. And here the problem was that most of these contracts are one-sided. When negotiating, obviously due to bargaining power, the foreign buyers usually give us a template, and the Bangladeshi exporters are obviously, they have very little say to negotiate that contract, because most of these multinational, this is our standard contract, it's been reviewed by our legal department and we can't change much. And obviously with the Bangladeshi exporters, in an attempt to get the business, it obviously does not go into the fine print and just signs whatever is being given by them. In most cases I've seen in the supply contracts, either the dispute resolution clause is missing, or If there is a dispute resolution clause, the Bangladeshi exporters have sometimes agreed to a foreign dispute resolution. So just agreeing to a foreign venue would entail them to take the flight to Singapore or wherever the dispute resolution forum is chosen, and then have that dispute arbitrated. And many of these Bangladeshi exporters just don't have that flexibility, financial capacity to do that, to test against these giants, because the outcome is uncertain. What I've seen is that these Bangladeshi exporters either tried to negotiate their way through an amicable settlement. Also, they were quite apprehensive that maybe in future they will not get the required orders from these buyers if they go on a fight with them. So I've seen a whole lot of things in practice, and all I have to say is that time has come to actually negotiate contracts. Time has come to actually read the fine print and not just sign whatever standard contracts are given to you.
Right. But Barrister Sattar, let me ask you something. A fair contract can only be had if it is between two equal parties. See, that's the bottom line. So when you have totally unequal parties, the chances of having a fair contract is next to nil. So is it possible for us nationally, maybe under the auspices of BGMEA, to come up with a standard boilerplate where some of these things the suppliers are protected and it's an even contract? Of course, there will be variable components to it, like the price, this, that, what have you, but the rest of it, can it be done?
Well, I don't see any reason why it cannot be. Unless we try, we'll never know. Obviously, I'm not saying that it will be resistance-free. Everything depends upon your appetite. If you stick to your gun as to what you want, then a lot of people negotiate. But if you're out there that I'm just going to get the business, regardless of what I sign or what the cost is, and it's just the mindset.
Let me switch gears and ask you about when a company goes into receivership or bankruptcy. Let's say a buyer goes into a bankruptcy. As you know, the whole landscape as to how it affected the supplier base over here and the relationship with Bangladesh Bank and with credit and what have you. Go into that a little bit.
Yes, basically when a company goes into a receivership or administration, maybe when they're unable to carry on their business, right? And now, one is sort of a liquidation when they wrap up their business. And what we have are just contracts, which are unsecured debts, which the buyer owes to the Bangladeshi exporter. Now, whenever there is a liquidation, obviously the liquidation will take place in the foreign buyer's country. And the process is that whoever is unsecured, they will need to fill out a form, a claim form, along with supporting documents and send it to the relevant buyer. And then they will present it to the court, and you have to wait in the long list of when you will get paid. And it's a lengthy process, okay? Sometimes the company buyer just goes into administration because it's restructuring. It's not wrapping up, but it's just reorganizing its business. In that case, obviously the issue is negotiation with the concerned company and the new administrator in place. The administrator has very wide powers, and they can continue with contracts that are profitable to the company and also cancel the onerous contracts, as you would like to call it, which are not beneficial for the company. These are the two things that happen.
So now, contract negotiation, when you're entering into a contract, that should you not look into that if either party is to go into receivership or administration, so can that be under a contract laid out as well?
Well, personally, I do not think so, because once you go into receivership or liquidation, the relevant law of the land will take priority over whatever has been agreed upon. So for example, me and you cannot agree upon that if you go into liquidation, I will get paid over all your, for example, your staff salary, the taxes that are due, because these are preferential debts, as you call it, preferential payments that need to be made. And when they use the term preferential, that means that in a liquidation scenario, these are the first thing that need to be cleared. For example, your salaries of your employees, your taxes that are due, any other administrative costs and stuff. So you cannot contractually get your way out of it to give priority to someone else. But obviously there is nothing to stop you from having a clause which says that certain categories or certain lists for unsecured creditors as well. So if someone says that, oh, my same category of unsecured creditors, if you would like to give me priority, I don't see any harm, but I do not know how it will work out in practice, because ultimately it will be the liquidator who will be deciding according to the rest of the land. If it says that whichever debt comes first will need to be repaid first, then again, that clause will not stand. So it just differs from country to country, may differ from country to country.
So now, let me switch back again to force majeure. So you pointed out something very important. Then when buyers enforce that clause, it wasn't right, because they cannot really do that. They can invoke force majeure if in their own place they cannot sell. And in dealing with their creditors, if they were to go enforce or default in one of their contracts, they can then invoke force majeure.
Yeah, I think, like I said earlier, it's the whole issue is the causal link. Now, with standard supply agreement, that I'm going to be supplying, if the Bangladeshi exporter, I'll be supplying X number of garments pieces. Okay. Now, if the pandemic doesn't stop me from supplying that, unless the contract states that this, you will receive payment only upon if I sell those garments in the high store retail stores in the UK, Canada, then maybe you can say that, yes, hang on, because I couldn't sell it, there's an intervening third party pandemic or a third reason pandemic. That's why I'm not going to pay you, or I'm canceling the orders. Okay. But in most cases, I've seen that was not the case. It was a simple outright supply agreement. So I'm going to pay you as soon as I receive the goods. Now, if I did not receive the goods, then I have a valid claim of saying that, no, I'm not going to be paying you anything. But once I'm receiving the goods, I cannot rely on, hey, there's a pandemic going on and I can't sell these goods, and there's a fair event, that's why I cannot buy it from you and I'm canceling the orders. To me, that is not an acceptable argument. And like I said, there has to be a causal link between the performance as well as force majeure reason or the event.
Right. Now, the other argument would be if the buyer, upon this incident, which is the pandemic, they've gone belly up, they've gone bankrupt. Well, then all bets are off, obviously. There is no need to talk about force majeure or anything else.
Liquidation and belly up scenario is totally different. That's exactly. Totally. Then the laws will kick in, and you have specific laws that deal with ongoing contracts, non-performed contracts. Different.
That's the point I was making. So, except in that event, buyers, so long as the seller has performed under its obligation in the contract with them, they cannot use force majeure, because there has to be a causal link, as you pointed out. I think that was brilliant analysis, Samir. Once again, we run out of time so quickly whenever we're talking about such interesting subjects. But I hope that was of great value to our listeners, understanding what force majeure is and under what circumstances it can be used, and liquidation when a company goes into receivership. So once again, Barrister Sattar, thank you so very much for taking your time out to be with us. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure is all mine.
All right. So I'd like to thank our audience for joining us. It has been an incredible session, and I look forward to bringing Barrister Sattar many more times in our program. So stay safe. I'll catch you in the next session. Bye-bye.